Well, hello there. In this video, I'm gonna go over about 30 tips or so of agent teams, basically everything you need to know to just have a pretty good understanding of what it is, how you should use it, when you should use it, and some kind of good use cases that I found using agent teams. Now, there's a lot of different orchestration solutions out there, but I always like to use kind of the ones that were developed by the tooling itself. And I've been having a lot of fun using agent teams for work and also just for my personal stuff. And I thought it would be a really good video. Now, if you haven't seen my 50 tips of just general Claude Code video, I recommend you to watch that. But this particular video is about agent teams. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So what is agent teams and why should you use it? So at a high level, an agent team is essentially an orchestrator of subagents. But there's a big difference between subagents and how agent teams work. And we're going to get into that. Now, if you don't know what a subagent is, at a high level, you can just think of it as another Claude Code instance that your main Claude Code instance spawns. Oftentimes, when you create a subagent, it usually has this colored text. That's how you can tell, at least in Claude Code, that you are spawning a subagent. So in this quick example, I essentially had a task and I had my architecture and backend and front end subagents essentially be all coordinated. This is my agent team. Now you can have any agent team, any composition of it. Essentially, it's unlimited, right? I have this one here for code writing, and I have another one for writing, which helps me gather context. It helps me edit. It has a writer. So there's a bunch of different things you can do. But the high level idea, the main concept is that you have one leader who is kind of the orchestrator, and you have many different teammates. And you could have any teammates that you could imagine. Now, before we move on, one important thing is that all of this kind of operates around a set of tasks. And then the concept is you have the leader who has all the tasks, and then they spawn all of these agent teams, and then the agents do individual tasks. Now, one of the most important things about team agents, unlike just using sub-agents, is that the teammates talk to each other. Let me try to demonstrate. Can you work on the next set of tasks? Let's do 5 tasks or so at a time so I can get a clear picture of all the different things you guys are doing. For this project, I kind of created a bunch of tasks to save some time, but ideally in a real world instance, you would probably have a plan mode and then you're just planning up some tasks. You're essentially working with the main agent, the orchestrator, to create a set of plan for your different subagents. Now, one key thing here that you need to know is that because the agents talk to each other, unlike subagents, the context is somewhat shared. It's not fully shared. The way they actually do the sharing of the context is they just use messages to each other. So you're not actually getting all of the context from the main orchestrator. It's really just the messages. So that's a high level tip that you need to think of. If you ever feel like your subagents in your agent team is not having enough context, then you need to ask the main agent to send the additional context, or you need to add more context into the tasks that you're creating. So as you can see here, my context gatherer, my editor, my writer, they're all kind of talking to each other. And that's kind of the point. They're sending messages to each other, not strictly sharing the context, but just sharing what is needed for each other. So the next big tip is that once you have a bunch of subagents, you can talk to any teammate. Now this is kind of messy and very crazy. This is the split pane view. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. But let me bring this other view so it's easier to see it. Can you run the agent team to do another pass of editing? But yeah, essentially at a high level, you can talk to any of the teammates. You can talk to the orchestrator. So essentially, you could guide any of the agents for if you created another Claude instance. It's basically the same. Now, the most important difference between a sub-agent and an agent team is that the context is completely protected between the sub-agent and the main agent. The sub-agent doesn't know anything that the main agent knows unless the main agent sent an initial seed of stuff. And the sub-agent, its only job is to essentially do some side effects or send information back. Now the agent team, as I mentioned, they talk to each other, they coordinate each other, and they share a common task. And the orchestrator can control any of these sub-agents. That's kind of the big difference. So for tip number 4, essentially, if you need just some very quick results, use a sub-agent. If you need collaboration, use an agent team. Tip number 5 is that compared to just using a single instance of Claude Code, agent team just costs more. You're basically doing parallel work. So if you're not used to or already doing like multiple Claude instances, then the usage might outpace what you're used to normally. So the question obviously is, when should you use this? Like, what is it really good for? So in my opinion, the best use case for agent teams so far has really been when I needed to accomplish something, some task that needed like various different tasks to be completed in different domains. So a really obvious example for full stack is this example that I had, which is essentially a front end, a back end, and an architecture. And in this particular example, it even created like multiple front ends, and because it recognized that they were in like different places. So it really speeds up the execution. Now, another really good use case, at least for me, is for writing. So I have a context gatherer, I have an editor, and I have a writer. The editor essentially scores a bunch of things and suggests edits. The context gatherer, like essentially gathers context from my like local vector memory. And a lot of my writing I do with this flow. Before, what I had to do was I had to kind of sequentially do these things, and it took a lot longer time. But now with agent teams, I'm able to kind of do all of this all at once. And then they actually help each other, because sometimes rather than writing the entire thing, it might go grab a context for like a part of my writing, for example. So tip number 7 is you should probably skip using agent teams for sequential work. This is actually kind of a good example right here. Front end 1, front end 2, front end 3. Like most of the time, if you're working on the same like pages, you probably don't want to have multiple front ends, because then like they could kind of conflict with each other unless you use like work trees or something like that. All right, so let's get started on like installing it or like setting it up, because depending on when you watch this, it may not be out of experimental. So I think right now it's still in this like experimental stage, so you have to make some changes in your settings. All right, so tip number 8 is to set this up. You actually just have to change this Claude Code experimental agents thing. Now, another like side tip from here is if you don't want to like learn how to do this kind of stuff, I'll link the docs for the Claude Code like agent teams thing, and you just have to paste it in and ask Claude Code to set it up, and then you just like restart Claude Code. But essentially you need this and then restart Claude Code. And tip number 9 is you just use natural language to define the team that you want. So let's try to create like a perf agent team. So I'll say something like, I want you to create a performance agent team. One is specializing in UI performance, so maybe looking for jank. And we'll do another one that is specializing in looking for errors, specialize in just debugging and deep diving into errors. And another one that like is looking for like pixel perfect changes, like UX expert, like a quality expert. I don't really know if this is going to work, but the high level idea is that you can create a team to do anything. Now, if you wait to the end of the video, there is a section where I kind of cover some use cases that I think is pretty useful. So wait for that. All right. Looks like it's created it. It created a UI perf agent as a teammate lead. It created a debugger right here. Nice. So yeah, it's creating a bunch of teams. Okay. This is not doing it justice because I can't really show you guys here, but you could tell that what's going on, right? But I actually have like a huge screen, and in my huge screen, it looks really nice. But for the rest of the demo, I'll probably use the other view, just so it's easier to see. Now, tip number 10 is that you can actually specify what model each teammate should run. Now, this is like a really good tip if you're really cost sensitive, if you don't have unlimited tokens, which I think most people don't. But for example, you can say something like, for the agent teams, make sure the debugger runs on Opus 4.6, the UI perf runs on Sonnet, and then the UX quality runs on Haiku. This is still definitely an experimental feature. I definitely notice it, especially using it in tmux. We're going to cover that a little bit. But yeah, essentially you can request that and then we'll make the changes. It needs to shut down the agents to do that. But anyways, we'll move on. Okay, next we're going to cover display modes. Now, I already have been showing you the 2 display modes, but this display mode that you see right here, this is called the split plane. And then it's available in tmux. I've only been able to get it to work on tmux. They say that you can get it to work on iTerms, but personally, I haven't been able to, even though I installed all the stuff. But this is a split pane. And then the default mode is the in panel one, I think, the in process one, the all-in-one terminal, which is this one. Let me show you guys again. Let's split up our agents to write a new article on the latest AI news. Yeah, let's talk about the GPT 5. The new GPT. I think it's 5.4. Let's have a researcher, which is like basically the context gatherer, the writer, and the editor as well. And just write me a draft using my usual rules for writing. By the way, as a side note, if you guys are interested in using Claude Code for writing, which I actually think is the best writing tool ever created, let me know in the comments and I'll do an entire dedicated video on how I write with Claude Code. And it's actually a lot more involved. I sometimes, for my side project, I actually use Claude Code more for writing and gathering research and all of that stuff than coding. It's because I code so much at work, you know, and I don't have that much time for like side projects that I want to launch. I mean, I always have so many ideas. But yeah, so you see, this is the paint mode. You can essentially go to it by hitting down and then hitting enter, and then you can see the different agents and you can look at it and you can guide it the way you want. And then earlier I showed you what the split panes are, but essentially it's the same thing as the parallel in panel thing, but it's just split. And to do that, you need to have tmux. So to get that like split mode, and if you have a big window, big like 32-inch monitor, you probably can do that, but you essentially need to do team mode and tmux. I'll show you. So in your settings, you have to change this to team mode and tmux. So for this, all of these settings, again, I think you should just have Claude Code do it for you. So I'm just showing you so you know where it is. But yeah, there's two different modes, split pane and then in process. And then for, if you want the split pane, you need to be in tmux. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna talk about a little bit is just high level controls, you know, the task coordination, how does that work? And like the planning and kind of the high level life cycle of an agent team. I think it's important to know because you could get into some weird states. So at a high level, every single time that an agent team wants to start doing something, it will create the agent team and then it will create essentially a task list. So as you can see here, there was task number 1, which was assigned by the team lead, and it's essentially telling the research the GPT-5 release and gather writing context, for example. You can imagine this for any kind of like coding tasks, right? And then here, there's task 3 to review the GPT-5 essay. Now, these task lists are essentially created by the agent orchestrator, but you yourself can be a lot more like prescriptive, right? If you have a very good idea on how you want things to be done, then you could kind of work with the agent team initially to create the plan, which is kind of the next thing. So let's get to the tips. So as I mentioned, if you hit Control T right there, you should be able to see the tasks. And you can see that these are the tasks that we're doing for this particular high level task that I gave you. Let me do a coding one so it's a little bit more clear. All right, let's work on the next project. Create one front end, one back end, and one architecture agent team. And let's create a set of tasks and execute on the next thing that we need to do. This is kind of a side project that I'm just kind of working on the side. Essentially, I planned out a bunch of things ahead of time. And I like keep that task list locally saved. So anytime I want to work on it, I just kind of tell it, hey, what do I have to do next? Because I can't remember what I was working on before because I literally work on this like once a week or something. So I try to spend a lot of time planning up ahead of time. And then I just save a bunch of things to do and I say, hey, let's get working on it. This is a side project, so I don't really care too much. But if it's for your like main work, this strategy probably won't work that much. You need to know what you're building. But for me, this is like a pretty simple CRUD app, so it works. All right, so it created the plan of like what to do, and it's spawning 3 agents right now. I just think it's so cool. Every time I see like the different colors of the agents, I don't know. It's just really cool. So let's hit Control T. I'm telling you, it's still a little buggy, but you can see that it's every time I hit Control T. Oh, wow. Okay, so here's the 3 sub agents, and then let's hit Control T. Control T. Control T.
One eternity later.
Control T. Okay. I mean, you could briefly say it. Like I said, it's still experimental, so it doesn't work exactly. But it is kind of cool though, because you'll be able to see these probably accepting tasks and like sending messages to each other if you're like looking at it. All right, so this next tip, I don't think you need to worry too much about it, but essentially as you're monitoring these, you'll notice that some of them will start going idle. Then you can kind of just like talk to it. Here you can be like, okay, after this, also like quickly build a cool flare when someone hits like the login button. I don't know, something like that. You could just like give it additional things. They're just subagents, right? They're essentially instances of Claude Code. So you could just have it do stuff. You could also tell it to go, hey, keep working on the next task. Now, the next tip is that you don't have to manage any of the messages. Like there's no polling that happens. The teammates automatically receive messages and they also automatically stop. And like essentially the lead gets notified when it's done. So technically you don't really need to go to these different ones. You should just be mainly looking at this one. So like if you have that split pane, it's easier to see and guide the other things. But at a high level, you don't really need to manage these other ones. Tip number 17 is that you need a plan before you do any implementation. So if you like to use Claude Code kind of like without plan mode and just straight execution, agent teams is not for you. Now, in terms of guidance for the overall, like the way the task should do, you should really lean on the main agent. For example, I could say, hey, make sure you have a very high quality bar for all of the code. So you should tell all of the subagents to have this high quality bar. For example, something like that. So that should trickle down into your agent teams. Sometimes when you make these kind of changes though, like model changes and stuff like that, it will probably try to shut off all of the agent teams and then like recreate them. Now, tip number 19 is that you don't have to actually go in individually, turn off all of these agents. They have life cycles. So when they're idle for a certain amount of time, they'll just like kill itself. They will just like destroy itself. One important tip here is that because these agents, they don't like persist between invocation. If you are a developer who likes to kind of think of every Claude Code instance as like you're building up the context in that instance and you don't need to actively work on it, agent teams might not be like the best thing for you. But again, I'm going to get to the use cases, which I think agent teams are really good. But yeah, as you can see right here, you see how these kind of grayed out? That means they're idle. So after they're done and idle for a while, Claude Code will just like turn these off automatically. The main orchestrator will turn it off automatically. Now, if you felt like one of these subagents are not necessary, like one of these teammates are not necessary, then you can actually tell your orchestrator to clean up. I would actually leverage the orchestrator to do it because at least from the docs, it says that you could get into a really weird state and probably like have some memory leaks if you don't let the main orchestrator turn it off yourself. I mean, at the end of the day, you could always just turn your computer on and back on again, but yeah. Now, if you're used to hooks, and I'll show you a graphic of this, but essentially there's additional hooks for teammate idle and task complete. So you can do like things when these events happen in the life cycle. So I haven't found a lot of interesting uses for this yet, but they're there for you if you like to leverage hooks. I'm pretty sure some people are going to find like really cool ways to use this. Maybe for like task complete, it could send something into like Notion or something, and then like send something into Jira or something, or maybe a Slack message, something like that. There's going to be someone who like figures out something interesting. But yeah, going back to it, you can see the team fully is shut down, and it kind of gives you a summary of what it did. All right, so for best practices, in my opinion, I think a lot of the best practices that I gave you for Claude Code still maintains true. And again, context is king, context is best served fresh and condensed. But there's some like high level concepts that's kind of unique to agent teams that we should go over. So one thing you can leverage for each of the teammates is that they will load your Claude Code, like your main claude.md. They'll also load your like MCP servers and all of that stuff that your main agent has access to, but it will not take your main agent's conversation history. So whatever context that you built up in that main agent before you like started the agent swarm, it will not have that context. So if you want part of that context in your agent teams, there's like a few ways to do it, but the best way is to ask your agent team to include that into the task specific details. You know, you could just say something like, hey, I want to start working on the next set of projects, but can you embed all of the important code pointers that I've gathered so far in this working session into my tasks so that my agent teams have good context. Something like that. All right. And the next tip number 23, is that you want to start with like 3 to 5 teammates max. I actually found like anything more than 3 feels a little overkill, to be honest, because the tokens essentially scale linearly to how many agents you are running at the same time. And I don't know, I just found like 3, maybe 4 agents are like kind of the best use. Of course, you'll probably find like many different use cases for why you need more, but my recommendation here is to start with like just 3. And then for each agent, like one like high level task, you really want to juggle like only 5 or 6 like tasks within the larger task. Like you don't want to have like too crazy of a thing to do, like not all at once. Like it's okay to plan out a bunch of different things that has a lot of subtasks, but then you want to just like kick them off, do one concise thing, and then bring them all back and then start the next thing. You don't want to do too much, right? So the plan mode here is really important. You need to ask the main orchestrator to like delegate the work in like a proper amount, like load balance it. You know, talking about things like this is so funny. I feel like it's kind of like project management, and you're literally orchestrating a team of engineers, and a lot of the best practices that you would do for like regular teams, I feel like it kind of applies here. Another really important thing, and I think I kind of allured to this with like front end 1, front end 2, front end 3 in my like earlier example, but basically you don't really want the agents to be touching the same files. And my experiments with like Git work trees and agent teams didn't make sense because you guys are all trying to work on the same high level task at once. So it's only really good if you have like a very small app that has front end and back end all at once, and you're just trying to do all of those things. Or if you're trying to review diffs, or like if you're trying to investigate things and you want competing arguments. But yeah, like you don't want it to touch the same files if you can. So really think about that when you're creating your teams. Tip number 26, and I ran into this like once, that's why I'm adding it here, but sometimes like the leader will start like just implementing stuff. And so you have to like kind of guide it and like tell it, hey, stop. Like delegate this out to your teams, or wait for your teams to complete their task before starting. I think this is just inherently an issue with this being experimental. But yeah, so that's just a side tip that I ran into that I wanted to let everyone know. Okay, so the next thing is about use cases. And I think I've been showing you guys kind of the most like common use case, right? But let's also like kind of go over some of the interesting ones that I think you could use this for. So for code reviews, so we could do this right now. Let's do a code review on the latest changes that you made. I want one that is focused on security. I want one that's focused on performance. And I want one that is focused on test coverage. Combine the results of these reviews, and then let's have one really good review. So this is actually a really common use case. And then I think one of the very common things that people miss about using Claude Code and like Codex or any of these like agentic systems, they think that these agents can like do everything all at once. And what I found to be true is that they're incredible at doing things, but you definitely need to guide it, right? If you don't guide it, you'll get high level broad answers. But if you want it to go deep into something, it can do that. And I feel like agent teams are really good at doing all of these all at once because they can share a lot of context with each other, but also will not get like biased by the other ones, right? If you try to do this all in parallel, like doing a security and a performance and a test coverage, all in the same thing, sometimes the agents will like be biased because it has previous context that it gathered. So that's why it's like really good for this use case and another use case, which is competing hypotheses for debugging. So this is tip number 8. Let's say that you're doing a SEV investigation and then you came up with like 5 theories, like, or the agent came up with 5 theories. Instead of going through one by one and investigating it, you spawn 5 agent teams and then you let it just go off. This is really important because the bias, like I'm telling you, there is a thing about context. As soon as it gets some part of the context that it thinks that is true, the agent will lean towards thinking that it's correct. So using sub agents to protect the agent from each other, right? Because their context is split when they're in subagents. It helps them kind of have these competing theories and investigate it unbiased. And then when they come back, then they can share notes. Then the main agent has all the notes and is able to kind of make a holistic picture. And I found this to be really useful for my work when I'm like debugging. Now, a good tip here when you're exploring this parallel like path is like you should start with like read-only tasks, in my opinion, right? Because this kind of goes with the other tip about colliding issues. But if you're just exploring with this, read-only things are really good ways to explore because you don't have to deal with like the file conflicts and all that kind of stuff. And that's why I kind of mentioned the debugging agent. And another really good one that I use is, and I showed this already, but for my writing, my like context gatherer and researcher, they're like read-only, right? And they're essentially like very important for my writer. Another really good use case that I've been using is essentially if you're doing like Android and you have like an iOS counterpart, and if you guys are sharing like architecture, for example, then you can leverage that symmetry to be able to essentially have a parity agent that's looking at the iOS code or the Android code, and then creating tasks, like a task creator based on those, and then like executing agent. It's probably one of the most efficient way to have feature parity work as long as the architecture is the same. So that's like a really good use case as well. All right, and my final tip, and I kind of showed this earlier, is that you still want to monitor and steer their agents from time to time. If you have these things run too long, unguided, it can just go off the rails and then you could be just wasting a lot of tokens. So constantly monitor them. All right, that's my 30 tips for agent teams. I hope this video has been informative to you. If you like this kind of videos, I did a bunch of Claude Code videos, also this agentic engineering video. I actually think this agentic engineering video is really important, like context for the next, the rest of this year. I highly encourage you guys to watch it. And also the Claude Code 50 tips video is, I think, just my best video so far. It's just like fundamentally, I think covers everything you need to know about Claude Code. Obviously not this feature because I just covered it. But yeah, as more features come out, I will cover them. Also, if you want to learn about Codex or OpenClaw, let me know. There's just so many things to cover in this whole new AI, like coding, AI, engineering, like experience. It's wild, honestly. The amount of things that have been changed in the last 3 months, I think we really hit like an inflection point, and it's just going like this. Like it's at work, it's like everyone I talk to. Maybe I'm in a bubble with like tech people or whatever, but it's absolutely nuts. But thanks for watching as usual, and until I see you guys on the next one. Bye.